Let's talk about the BBC now. Yesterday, Zoe Ball, the Radio 2 breakfast show host, she sensationally, as they say, quit. She was getting like the best part of £1 million a year. I think it's about £950,000 a year. She was the second highest paid person in the BBC after Gary Lineker, 1.3 million. Zoe Ball was the highest paid woman in the corporation, in the Auntie Beebs establishment. Now, she's quit. She's been replaced by the much cheaper, very exciting Scott Mills. So he's going to get a lot less money. Gary Lineker, as you remember from last week, he's throwing in the towel as well. So pretty soon, I think after this season, he won't be hosting Match of the Day anymore, at least. So £1.3 million a year he will no longer receive. And of course, that other very high paid guy, £450,000 a year pedo, in-house BBC pedo, Hugh Edwards, he's gone, obviously, and unlikely to return, I would suggest. So the suggestion is that the era of the BBC super salary is finally coming to an end. Let's talk to the campaign director for Defund the BBC, Rebecca Ryan. Rebecca, it does look as if the direction of travel in so much as the BBC wastes so much of our licence fee money paying these people vast amounts of money, you know, to sort of talk into microphones and spin discs or to talk about the offside rule, and that was a good goal. It does seem as if maybe, just maybe, the BBC might not be paying quite so much to their alleged stars in the future.
Yeah, it definitely looks like a win for us, doesn't it? And it's kind of the BBC's realised that this creates hugely negative PR for them on an annual basis. So yeah, we fully welcome the fact that these three top earners have left, all on different terms. But it beggars belief, really, that the BBC doesn't sort of clock on to the bigger problem here coming down the line, which is there are thousands of YouTubers who have a bigger viewer base than they do, and you know they just can't carry on like this. So you know, happy to see her stepping down, along with Gary, and obviously Hugh has had to sling his hook. But I think there's got to be bigger changes to come.
And you know, the BBC always maintained it's an absolute lie. You know, if we don't pay Gary Lineker £1.3 million a year, the commercial sector will step in and pay him much more. We're just having to compete with private sector broadcasters. No one else would pay Gary Lineker £1.3 million for what he did. No one else would pay any DJ nearly £1 million a year to spin a few discs in the morning. This was a complete conceit, a complete lie by the BBC that they had to compete with the commercial broadcasters. So, you know, so you ask yourself, well, why? Why are they paying all these people so much money? I think it's because they pay themselves so much money. They pay themselves sort of £380,000 a year to be the BBC's, I don't know, direction of vision or something like this. I think it's because the executives pay themselves so much that they felt it was incumbent upon them to pay some of the on-screen stars and some of the radio stars vast amounts too. Either way, it's a basket case. It's a madhouse.
Absolutely, and this is the thing, isn't it? Even if it had been true that they had to compete with the commercial sector, well, that's not what the public sector broadcaster is supposed to be doing. They're supposed to be providing, you know, this kind of the news as for people who, you know, where it's not commercially viable, you know, in small little radio stations and sort of classical FM and all these kinds of niche things. They're not supposed to be competing with the commercial sector, but they know that they have to do that in order to keep their viewer base up, in order to then justify the license fee. So it's kind of like a dog wagging, the tail wagging the dog. And that's where the BBC's got itself completely tied in knots. It's the same motivation that gets them sort of spewing out all of this woke stuff because they're trying to desperately to attract a younger audience. But the younger audience just aren't, they're just not interested in watching the BBC. They don't consume content in that way. And it's just desperately, you know, tying itself up in knots, trying to keep hold of this license fee. Meanwhile, it's just splurging money left, right and centre and appealing to nobody.
When are they going to learn, you know, Auntie Beeb Centre at the Broadcasting House, new Broadcasting, old-fashioned ideas? When are they going to learn that they're never going to get the youth audience? They've lost it and they'll never get it back. As you say, they're all watching YouTube. I mean, this is as much a problem for the BBC as it is ITV, Channel 4 and all the other terrestrial channels. The audience is drifting away, but particularly the young audience. The BBC is obsessed with the youth audience. It's obsessed with the young audience. I mean, it's got rid of CBBC now, hasn't it, or something? But when it used to show children's programmes, its reason for children's programmes is you got to get them young, and then you keep them for life. It's kind of sinister, you know. It's sort of it's communist bloc thinking, and it never worked. So their audience, the BBC's audience, you know, if they have any loyal viewers left, and I think that number is dwindling. I mean, they're in their 50s, their 60s, their 70s. They're not in their 20s, they're not in their teens. And yet, the BBC spends all its efforts trying to appeal to teenagers, to 20-year-olds, at the expense of their real audience, who are middle-aged or older. It's insane.
Exactly, which is why it needs to have this license fee so that it can continue spewing this woke messaging out. Because the only people, like you say, who are actually watching this are these very middle-class, middle-aged, you know, have spent their whole life working in the public sector, or they're academics, or that kind of mindset, who are of an age where they still watch broadcast TV in that way. But like you say, with the young people coming up, they just aren't. And, you know, a lot of people, it's interesting because, you know, the viewer base on YouTube there's a lot of young people watching YouTube, but they're actually quite, you know, they're not that woke. You know, the audience on YouTube is quite different from what the BBC would think young people are interested in watching. So, you know, it would get, if it was having to get its income from subscription, it would be, it would be only serving that kind of middle-class, middle-aged North London dinner party set. And it would struggle to get many more subscriptions than that.
Moving on, I guess, but typical BBC story. I don't know if you saw Newsnight's intrepid Victoria Derbyshire interviewing Jeremy Clarkson in the middle of the demonstration by farmers yesterday in central London. I mean, you know, it's not her job to appeal to the crowd, but talk about not reading the room. So she says, so Clarkson's saying this is all wrong, you know, these farmers are being persecuted, people 300 years in the family, they're going to have to give up their farm. And so she said, well, you know, if they don't pay their inheritance tax, how else is the Chancellor going to pay for the NHS and public services? I mean, you could hear the booing in the air. I mean, they are so out of touch with the rest of us, aren't they?
It's absolutely outrageous. That was, you know, if it wasn't so horrendous what the government's doing to farmers, it would be funny. But, you know, the thing is with the BBC is that they just couldn't get their heads around the fact that, you know, that kind of money, I think the calculation's been done, which said that the money that would come from the inheritance tax on farmers would fund the NHS for 10 hours. You know?
I know, yeah.
And that's quite obvious for anyone to see before that calculation's been done, that it's not going to, how many farmers are there? Yeah. And it's not to say it's not a serious issue. It is a very serious issue for farmers and for the farming industry, because it's a small sector, but it is family-based. You know, it relies on handing it down. And £1 million is not a lot when you take into account farming equipment and all of that, and the land. We all can tell that's not a huge farm.
Yeah.
But for her to turn around and say you must fund the NHS.
Yeah.
You know.
because that's their league table, you see. Public sector, NHS, far more important than anything else at all. You, me, farmers, the entire private sector, as far as Rachel Reeves and probably Victoria Derbyshire is concerned, we are here specifically and only to fund their beloved public sector. How hilarious did you think it was, Rebecca, yesterday when the Prime Minister, you know, that guy, two-tier Keir, never hear Keir, no beer Keir, free gear Keir, so many nicknames, Farmer, Harmer, Starmer, when he said, look, my case, when I say that it's only a small amount of farms will be affected by this, I've been backed up by BBC Verify. And I thought, big deal. Who the hell trusts BBC Verify? The most pompous, self-important outfit that any company has ever made. Now, you know, people say that we're biased, and we, you know, but we've set up an office and they're going to check all the facts and they will be unassailably right about everything. Turns out that in its efforts to back up the Prime Minister, BBC, in this agricultural dispute, BBC Verify, in all its magnificence, didn't understand that there's a difference between acres and hectares, and had to make that correction. So my advice to anybody watching this is don't trust BBC Verify as far as you can throw it, because I'll tell you what BBC Verify is there to do, Rebecca, and I'm sure you agree. It is there to verify that the BBC is not biased, and that is a pile of crap, because the BBC is biased. And poor old Victoria Derbyshire, nice lady, by the way, you'll know her a bit, but her earnest little face, you know, Jeremy Clarkson say, you're BBC biased. I'm not biased. I'm not biased. Yes, you are. I feel sorry for them.
I mean, it would be funny if we weren't actually paying for BBC Verified.
I know, sorry, yeah, you're right, you're right.
We're paying for Capita to turn up and bully people on their doorsteps. So we pay for the whole mechanism that's forcing us to keep the BBC churning out all of this nonsense. And then, like you say, to have the Prime Minister saying, well, the BBC's backing us, you know, so it just so, you know, you're meant to keep those voices in your...
Yeah, Socialist Prime Minister says the BBC backs me. Oh, big shock. Wow, what a surprise. Honestly, this is really crazy, all this stuff. And the BBC, I think, is disappearing down the gurgler, I really do. But no doubt it'll keep the licence fee as long as these socialist lunatics from the Labour Party are running this country, or mismanaging this country, I should say. Rebecca, always a pleasure to talk to you. Thank you very much for your time. That's Rebecca Ryan, Campaign Director for Defund the BBC. We should defund the BBC, shouldn't we? But we won't get the chance as long as Farmer Harmer Starmer is in charge.